Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy, and today is the 5th of May 2023. Apologies for being a little bit late starting tonight. We've been trying to iron out a sound gremlin, which hopefully we've seen the back of. I'm happy to say that we're joined tonight by a guest, William Duguid. William, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to some interesting times in the next day or so. In Glasgow, not in London, obviously.
Oh, you've just answered one of my questions that I had lined up for you.
Oh, right, fair enough.
But that's okay, don't worry. William, you're a writer, an activist, a commentator, and a blogger, and you're involved with Perth and Kinross Yes Hub. Have you got any
That's right.
blogs?
I haven't done blogging for quite a while. I might get back to that sometime. But yes, I'm pretty much in with the works at Yes, Perth and Kinross Hub.
Okay, well, thank you for everything that you do. So I'll then go on now to today's routine Ukraine update, day 436. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of Russia's Wagner Group mercenary force, said in a sudden and dramatic announcement on Friday that his forces would leave the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut that they have been trying to capture since last summer, because of heavy losses and inadequate ammunition supplies. He asked defence chiefs to insert regular army troops in their place. Earlier, Prigozhin released a video showing him standing in a field of Russian corpses, personally blaming top defence chiefs for the losses suffered by his fighters in Ukraine. Prigozhin's expletives were bleeped out in the video published by his press service, in which he yelled, "We have a 70% shortage of ammunition. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where is the expletives ammunition?" The reference to Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov appeared to reignite the simmering feud between Prigozhin and the Russian establishment forces. Ukraine's Air Force said it downed one of its own drones after it lost control over Kyiv on Thursday. No casualties were reported. The Russian state-owned news agency TASS is reporting that the Ilsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar region of Russia has been attacked by a drone or drones for the second consecutive day. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said any self-respecting country would refrain from speaking to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky following the apparent drone attack on the Kremlin. The White House has dismissed as ludicrous claims by Russia that Washington orchestrated drone strikes on Moscow, saying the US was not involved in the incident and accusing Russia of lying. Finnish power utility Fortum has formally notified the Kremlin that it strongly objects to what it said was Russia's unlawful seizure of its subsidiary in the country. Bill Clinton has said that he knew in 2011 it was just a matter of time before Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine. He said that Vladimir Putin told him in 2011, 3 years before he occupied Crimea, that he did not agree with the agreement the US had made with Boris Yeltsin. Video footage has emerged overnight of a scuffle when the Russian delegation's secretary, Valery Stavitsky, snatched a Ukrainian flag out of the hands of his Ukrainian counterpart, Alexander Marikovsky, at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Group in Turkey. US intelligence chief Avril Haines has said that Russian forces in Ukraine are so degraded they cannot mount any significant offensive moves and are focused now on consolidating control of occupied territory. And our last Ukraine update, on a visit to The Hague, where the International Criminal Court, the ICC, is based, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Putin must be brought to justice for his war in Ukraine. So, William, was there anything there that stood out for you that you maybe want to comment on?
It's interesting to see that we're reporting still on the degradation of the Russian attacks, and there are signs of frustration and mischief making going on following the really strange drone hitting the Kremlin, and what might be behind that, and all the talk about that. I think the war is reaching a stage perhaps of confusion, but maybe the beginning of getting around to sorting things out with a Ukrainian counteroffensive reportedly to come. It's very hard to pick the bones out of it, though, because it's inherently a chaotic situation. So we just keep watching, I think.
Yes, and I suppose it is, even though it sounded as if it could be coming to final end stages, I'm sure it's going to be quite a while before that actually is the case.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very much
So
so.
yeah, so I'll move on to our first item of the evening. Keir Starmer has told Labour staffers to prepare for government after a set of local election results that suggest he could be on course to become the next Prime Minister. The Labour leader told Age today the party would win the next general election, even as polling experts suggested it could end up falling short of a majority. Speaking to officials at the party's headquarters, Starmer said, "We are going to bottle this feeling we have today and then we're going to turn it into a general election win next year." By this afternoon, Labour had gained 181 council seats and control of an additional 5 councils, while the Conservatives had lost 236 seats and 16 councils. Pollsters said the results indicated a terrible night for the Tories, but not a convincing enough win for Labour to be sure of forming a majority government after the next election. The Greens have won majority control of a council for the first time in the UK amid a triumphant set of local election results, with the party gaining more than 100 seats by mid-afternoon on Friday, above even internal expectations. With the results still coming in, the Greens had won 20 of the 34 seats on Mid-Suffolk Council, deposing the ruling Conservatives and in the process unseating the former local Tory leader Susie Morley. The result is the first majority council rule for the Greens. The party has previously run Brighton and Hove, but as a minority administration. It also became the largest party on East Hereford Council. Polling expert Michael Thrasher told Sky News that based on the results from Thursday, Labour could be expected to win the next election by about 8 points, not quite enough to form a majority. He said that Labour are set to become the largest party, but in a hung parliament. Commenting, SNP leader Stephen Flynn MP said, "It's increasingly clear that the SNP can hold the balance of power after the next general election, putting Scotland in prime position to pull the strings of a minority UK government. Voting SNP is the best way to beat the Tories in Scotland," he said, "and every vote for the SNP will be crucial to ensure Scotland wields real power and influence." With the pro-Brexit Labour Party lurching to the right and becoming indistinguishable from the Tories, the SNP will make certain that real change happens. Again, that was part of Mr Flynn's quote. So, William, aside from the success that the Green Party have had, which sounds heartening in my opinion, I'm kind of more interested about this idea of a potential hung parliament should it be a general election, if these results were transposed across to a general election, and Keir Starmer does come out with the possibility of a coalition government. So it seems that it's two choices. One is that he could coalesce with the Lib Dems, and I think if he was to do that, then the cost would be proportional representation and that kind of constitutional change. But if he was to decide to side with the SNP, then again, I guess the cost or the price would be a Section 30 and another independence referendum. Do you think with that kind of choice, he would really have no option but to go with the Lib Dems as a partner in a coalition hung parliament?
Well, if we can trust the sort of rhetoric that's been coming out of the Labour Party, he's more likely to go for the Lib Dems as a coalition partner. The last time somebody went for the Lib Dems as a coalition partner, the price was also a referendum on proportional representation, and that resulted in a fairly flat outcome that changed nothing. So history also shows that the Lib Dems tend to gravitate towards their coalition partners, because I think the Tories got more from the Lib Dems than the Lib Dems ever got from the Tories. So I think for Keir Starmer, it will probably be a no-brainer that he would go for the Lib Dems as the coalition partner. It would be very interesting if the SNP did hold the balance of power, and if it did go that way, because then you have to be careful what it is you're going to ask for, because it has to be more than just a little nudge along the road. It absolutely has to be, at the minimum, an independence referendum. I would rather that we contested the election, and I say we, I'd rather the election was contested on the basis of it being a mandate for independence and the start of negotiations. I don't think, with what we're hearing from the SNP, that's actually the road they're going to go down. But people like Gordon McIntyre Kemp certainly say that that's really what you have to do in order to stop the SNP vote drifting towards Labour.
Thank you, William. I do hope to kind of get on to the actual council election results, but just before we do, so if you think that Starmer would go with the Lib Dems rather than the SNPs in any coalition government, looking at the state of the country and considering it's not going to improve that much between now and a general election, do you think maybe the SNP then would have dodged a bullet if they don't end up becoming part of the government in Westminster?
Well, you could argue that, but I think really the SNP should be concentrating on what they do with getting the balance of power, because I don't think the people of Scotland are particularly interested in watching the SNP help Labour to govern the UK. I think they want certainly the independent supporting part of it, and which would presumably be the result of the vote which got the SNP in that position, would be looking to get ourselves down the road towards independence, make the progress that we haven't been making really over the last few years. And it's a case, again, of settle up, not settle down. And I think people would insist on that of the SNP.
Okay, thank you. So let's stop fantasizing or summarizing about an event that's in the future and yet to happen, and go back to the actual council election results. What are your thoughts on what's actually caused this devastating result for the Conservative Party? Is Brexit part of it? I mean, I suppose I think that. Do you agree with me that it's anger that has caused the Tory Party to crash and burn? Anger at things like Brexit, the Truss Quarten, when Truss was Prime Minister, excrement in rivers, cost of living crisis, or.
Well, how long have you got? It's a list of misery, and I think people have got fed up with it. I think the fallout of Brexit was probably experienced in the council elections in 2019. This is a wipeout on top of a wipeout for the Tories, because they'd already lost 1,000 seats in 2019, and this is the same set being contested now. I think therefore the more recent depredations that people have been feeling is what has led to this. People are totally cheesed off with living under a Tory government, with all the things you mentioned, with insecurity in terms of energy costs, in terms of where the economy is going, and inflation, and indeed excrement in rivers, and just the general feeling that life is just a struggle for people, except for the elite. And the elite seem to get favoured in terms of tax breaks, in terms of all the interesting connections they can make, and really the Tories looking after their pals. There comes a point in every government when people get cheesed off with it, but the Tories have exacerbated it, I think, by the pantomime of the last couple of years. So it's not surprising to see. It's a very natural reaction of the electorate, I think.
Thank you, William. The next item's related, so we might be able to explore a few more things about what's going on down in England. The opposition parties have said that voter ID poses a real threat to the UK general election next year, as countless reports of voters being turned away at polling stations during the local elections in England emerge. As polls closed, the Electoral Commission reported that newly introduced Tory voter ID laws had meant some people were regrettably unable to vote, and that it posed a greater challenge for some groups in society. The SNP has said this poses a serious threat to the running of the general election, and even a possible by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, where the requirements would be in place. Commenting, SNP Cabinet Office spokesperson Kirsty Blackman MP said, "It is deeply troubling that voters were turned away from polling stations and unable to express their democratic wishes, all because they were not carrying ID. One person being denied their right to vote is one too many, and this could pose a serious threat to the upcoming general election. In fact, the next real test of these Tory laws could come even sooner if we are to have a by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. It seems the Tory plan to exclude people from voting has worked, as certain groups have not been able to cast their vote. The Tories are barring people from taking part in democracy in a desperate attempt to cling on longer in government. She went on to say, we will continue to oppose the policy of voter ID and we will not introduce it for Scottish elections in the Holyrood, Parliament controls Holyrood. Forgive me, I'll read that again. She went on to say, we will continue to oppose the policy of voter ID and we will not introduce it for elections in the Scottish Parliament controls Holyrood and local council elections. So, William, this is disenfranchisement, isn't it? And it's inconsistent in that Oyster cards for older people are valid as a voter ID, but the same Oyster cards for younger people are not valid. So do you think that proves that this system is a con?
I don't know if it's a con. It's basically a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, because voter fraud is not a significant problem in UK elections. And the word you use, disenfranchisement, it's certainly getting on for disenfranchisement. And the inconsistency doesn't work for me. And another thing that doesn't work for me is the apparently harsh way of looking at some cases, at least anecdotally. We've been hearing of people being turned away because their passport photo didn't look much like them. Well, of course, it can be up to 9 or 10 years old. So, of course, there might have been some changes to your appearance. I'm sure there are for mine, because mine's renewed in 2025 and I look really quite young in the last one I had. That kind of thing, the rules being applied in that sort of quixotic way, does not augur well. And I think it's just as well that the Electoral Commission are going to do a report on this, first an initial one in June and then something with recommendations in September, because I think there may need to be tweaks and there may need to be recommendations that get put into practice to stop the nonsense happening. I'm not happy with ID at all, but it really needs to be applied with a wee bit of fairness if it's going to be. Whether it will hit a by-election in Rutherglen, I don't know. I thought the plan was maybe to go with it for UK general elections from October, and I would like to see the recommendations beforehand. So I don't know about that, but certainly it, it's not great. So more work to be done to make this work, and I'd rather see it scrapped altogether. But let's do the work.
Okay, thank you, William. And maybe just before we leave, what's going on in England at the moment, in Westminster, have you seen the news that the Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack has told UK's civil servants that no government staff should be allowed to work under Jamie Hepburn, Scotland's new Minister for Independence, which kind of chimes with the recent toing and throwing from where we've been told that we're not allowed to use British embassies, or Scottish ministers aren't allowed to use British embassies abroad.
Well, it's in a similar vein. George Fuchs, I see, is Baron Fuchs is cheering about this because he thinks it will put a spike in the very idea of there being an independence minister. This really, to me, is quite simply the UK government interfering with the way in which the Scottish government fulfills a manifesto commitment, and it's truly not on. Whether he will have any luck, Alistair Jack, in making this happen, I don't know. If he does, that might be a significant barrier to actually moving forward, certainly with a post of independence minister, but also it should be used tactically by the Scottish government as a spur to the people, say, look what they are doing to us. Look at how they are denying our democracy yet again in another way. And it might be a battleground that they're better working with than some of the interventions thus far, such as on the Section 35 for GRRR and possibly the deposit return scheme. This, I think, will resonate with people if Jack goes ahead with it.
So would you agree that Westminster's overreaching themselves?
I'm waiting for them to overreach themselves in such a way that it provokes a truly interesting response from the Scottish people. I have faith that eventually they will, because that's what they tend to do. They tend to just go too hard on it. And maybe this is the step.
Okay, thank you, William. I'll move on to the next item. The SNP has challenged Anas Sarwar to come clean over whether he supports UK Labour Party plans to use the profits from Scotland's energy resources to fund a council tax freeze in England instead of reinvesting them in Scotland. Stephen Flynn MP has called for money raised from the North Sea windfall tax to be reinvested in Scotland, including by using the funds to reduce household energy bills and through the UK government finally matching the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund. The UK Labour Party has said it would use a windfall tax to fund a council tax freeze in England. Commenting, SNP economy spokesperson Stuart Hosey MP said, Anas Sarwar must come clean over whether he backs the UK Labour Party's shocking plan to take Scotland's energy wealth and use it to fund a council tax freeze in England instead of reinvesting it in Scotland's communities. The SNP has repeatedly called for the money raised through a windfall tax to be reinvested in Scotland, including by reducing household energy bills and ensuring the UK government finally matches the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund for the North East. It's clear the SNP is the only party that can be trusted to stand up for Scotland, he said. Just like the Tories, the pro-Brexit Labour Party is planning yet another cash grab on Scotland's resources. So, William, this story made me think of Stephen Flynn at Prime Minister's Questions as leader of the SNP party. He's proven to be very adept at skewering the Conservative leaders, the Tories in power, Sunak and Keir Starmer, with one single arrow. And his question to Mr Sunak this week was, does the Prime Minister plan to take the credit for convincing Keir Starmer to drop his pledge on university tuition fees, as David Cameron managed to convince Nick Clegg to do so before? So this idea about the Tories and Labour kind of being, if I can say this, two cheeks of the same arse.
Say it if you like.
Forgive me. And then it also made me think of the Crone Report, which, although it was written in 1974, didn't come out until 2005, which said that oil would give Scotland's economy a chronic surplus to quite an embarrassing degree, leading to giving it one of the hardest currencies in Europe. Do you think there's a 21st century equivalent of the Crone Report, but this time on renewables?
I think that could well happen, yes. I think that there will be a cash grab, and we will, in the end, be powerless to do anything much about it, except, of course, use it as a way of convincing people that this is no longer on. We need to change the direction of popular opinion because there's too much apathy. Perhaps it's not apathy, though. Maybe it's concentration on the actual problems that people have got. And we've got to come across with the answer that independence is what gives us the platform to fix some of these things. So I don't think we can do anything about what the Westminster government does, but we can certainly try to do something about how it's perceived. And that's really where increasingly we should go. We're now in a struggle where we either get independence in the not too distant future or it is deferred, possibly indefinitely. And I really don't want to go there.
Thank you, William. So I'll move on to the next item. Shell is hoping to find a buyer for its stake in a controversial oil field off the Shetland Islands that became a key focus for the UK's anti-fossil fuel campaigners. The oil company still holds a 30% stake in the Cambo oil field, more than a year after it cast the project's future in doubt by pulling the plug on its investment, blaming a weak economic case and the risk of delay. The plans to develop Cambo, which is the second largest undeveloped oil and gas discovery in the North Sea, ignited fierce protest from climate campaigners and the threat of a legal challenge if ministers allowed new drilling to go ahead. Simon Roddy, who leads Shell's upstream business in the UK, said it had reviewed the project and struck a deal with Cambo's majority owner, Ithaca Energy, to sell off its stake. The announcement comes a day after Shell faced renewed calls to pay a higher windfall tax after reporting quarterly profits of $9.65 billion, well ahead of forecasts. So, William, this reminds me of what the SNP called the Great Scottish Renewables Robbery, as was the previous item, I guess. The SNP Green Government in Holyrood have always said that they want Campbell to stop and for the oil to stay in the ground. That is possible, isn't it, with Scotland's potential for renewables? So why not drop Campbell and go green?
I don't really know why the Westminster government would be countenancing um, taking more oil out of the ground at all, but they say it's necessary for the just transition. I don't buy that. I think a fairly hefty investment in uh, beefing up Scottish renewables would give you a diverse and reliable source of energy as much as is required to run not just Scotland, but indeed much of the UK. And so I'm not at all a fan of Cambo being further exploited. But I do think that what Shell are doing at the moment possibly makes it more rather than less likely that it will. And that is a concern because every day we see more signs of the effects of climate change, and this can only exacerbate them. So I await the next stage with some trepidation, I've got to say.
Thank you, William. I think the previous First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, would agree with you that it should stay in the ground. She's on record as saying that Campbell shouldn't be given the green light. Of course, I don't know if you saw recently, I think it was in April, Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer were up in the Beatrice Wind Farm in Wick, accompanied by Anas Sarwar. Ed Miliband tweeted while he was there, he said, Labour will make the UK a clean energy superpower. That means cheaper bills and great jobs across our country. This is how we rebuild Britain. And Anas Sarwar was seen alongside the tweets, more or less agreeing. Do you think this is going to, how's this going to sound here north of the border for Scottish Labour?
I think I think that the way things currently are, Scottish Labour could have some traction with that sort of thing, and that is the danger. I really think that the Scottish government needs to be hitting back at that fairly hard and saying, "Look, we need to take our own resources and do what we can with them to develop it, and make ourselves the renewable energy superpower of Europe, which is a possibility for us." Couch it in Scottish terms and as one of the big resources that we've got available to us, and let's win people over with it. If Labour are coming along and saying, we'll do energy a wee bit better than the Tories, and it's in a sort of nice way, and we'll use Scotland's resources for that, there are some people who are going to go with that, and that is a danger.
Okay, thank you, William. We'll move on to the next item. MPs have found that properties in the UK are facing waits of up to 15 years for solar installations due to a lack of grid connectivity. The Environmental Audit Committee, which looks at green policies in government, has said there is a dark cloud of delays hindering the UK from reaching its potential when it comes to renewable energy. An inquiry by the MPs into solar energy has found that the government's ambition to install 70 gigawatts of solar by 2035 may not happen if these delays continue. It found that some cases, customers were having to wait 10 to 15 years to secure a connection for solar installations. MPs said there were three key areas where the current approach on grid connection was delaying progress. A lack of physical infrastructure, such as cables and transformers, poor availability of data on solar photovoltaic generation, particularly for small-scale installations, and a queuing system of applications where developers are applying for grid connections without the project having planning permission. The committee said that solar energy did not need subsidies due to how cheap it was to generate, but it did find that the cost of installation could be prohibitive. MPs recommended the government should consider consulting on how it could facilitate affordable loans for households and give a VAT discount to household battery storage. The committee is launching another inquiry into the lack of connectivity in the UK, looking at barriers hindering low-carbon technologies from connecting to the grid. It will also consider the potential for a smarter and more flexible grid that enables dynamic demand management and peer-to-peer electricity trading and storing. The chair of the committee, Philip Dunn, said the delays could prevent the UK government from reaching its 2050 net zero emissions target. So, William, can I maybe just take the time to bust a myth, which is that it doesn't have to be sunny for solar panels to work. It only needs daylight. So even here in Scotland, where we do have daylight, we can have solar energy. So I just wanted to say that before we kind of delve into this. But how does this story, do you think, relate to transmission fees, where Scotland, which is an energy-rich country, we've agreed, has to pay more to connect to the national grid than anywhere else in the UK? That's mainly London and the South East. Is that part of this
Well,
connected?
in the sense that it's part of a sort of broken energy market that we have. The transmission fees and the connection fees are ridiculous, and they're the sort of ghost of a past time when the source and of the generation was far distant, and etc. etc. That's not the case anymore. It doesn't apply anymore. This problem, though, is another part, if you like, of the broken energy market, which is that we're big on the talk, but then when it comes to the delivery, the infrastructure isn't there, the funding isn't there, the way of producing the funding hasn't really been thought through, and time is a wasting. We are looking to hit targets in the next 10 years, 12 years that we're already on the verge of missing, and the idea of being zero carbon by 2050 is just mythical if you can't produce results in all the various areas, such as solar power, and also in properly investing in renewables. So it's just a broken market, and it needs fixed. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, William. And just before we do leave it, the report talked about the lack of physical infrastructure that's going to cause this delay. And I kind of think that I see it almost every time I take a train or a bus journey beyond the city limits, because you see brand spanking new state-of-the-art sleek wind turbines more and more across the Scottish landscape now. And yet alongside that, you see the kind of old-fashioned pylons that have been there since the national grid was built in the 1930s. So you've kind of got that power generated by the wind turbines gets transported around by these antique, almost museum-like, I mean, I love a good pylon, a handsome pylon. I quite like it, the way they stride across the landscape. But do you agree then that we can practically see the infrastructure discrepancy?
Yeah, I would just go along with that. It's not joined up thinking. It's not joined up infrastructure, and it's not joined up thinking. And that's what needs to change. It's getting urgent.
Okay, thank you, William. So the next item is a Welsh market town has been forced to cancel its coronation celebration after failing to raise any money to cover the costs. Caldicot in the southeast of Wales was planning a massive street party with a big screen to watch the coronation of King Charles III, a fully decorated town centre, entertainment, children's activities and competitions. But organisers were forced to call off the festivities when nobody contributed to a crowdfunding page and they failed to attract money from local authorities. A crowdfunder page has been running for 16 days with social media promotion of the funder but failed to raise any money. The team said it had approached Monmouthshire County Council and other organisations but was unable to gather the funds needed for the event. A big screen will show the coronation at Cardiff Castle, but Not My King protests will also take place on the city's streets. The Clwyd presiding officer in the Welsh Parliament, Ellen Jones, has said she will not attend the coronation service because of her Republican views. Jones, a Plaid Cymru member, said, "As Clwyd, I have engaged fully in all constitutional duties with the head of state and will continue to do so. However, as a Republican, I consider it is for others to celebrate a coronation." excuse me, the Synod will be represented by the Deputy Presiding Officer and Labour member David Rees. So, William, um, let me see, I've lost my... Yeah, here we go. Will you be watching the coronation tomorrow?
I'll be walking through Glasgow with the All Under One banner march, I'm afraid, and I'm not going to be carrying the coronation on my mobile phone. I do apologise, but I just thought I would go with my priorities, which I think are a lot of people's priorities tomorrow, particularly in Scotland, where the coronation is not as popular as it might be in some other places.
Yes, I know there's a website which is UK wide, where you can log on there to find out if there's a street party near where you live. And the last time I looked, which was a few days ago now, there were not any street parties planned in Scotland at all. So I wonder if you've been following. I don't know. Maybe we should pick up on the Welsh Clwyd, who said that she's not going to be going to the coronation, and yet there seemed to be, Humza Yousaf, the First Minister, he's going to be attending, isn't he? He's been criticised in some quarters for that.
Yeah, I think that's slightly unfair to criticise Humza Yousaf, because I do think that as First Minister, as distinct from the Speaker, he has to represent all the people of Scotland, and you know, there is a proportion of people in Scotland that do support the coronation. It may be a minority, but it's perfectly justifiable for him to be there. I wouldn't make too much about it if I were him, though, because he is on record as being having distinct Republican sympathies. So I think it shouldn't be a sort of big gesture on his part. It should just be that he's there. But I fully appreciate the Welsh speakers. I'm not going to try and do the Welsh word for that, I'm afraid. Her response to it, and that's perfectly valid.
Thank you, William. Have you had a chance to? Have you been following what's actually involved in the actual ceremony? The three swords of justice, for example, temporal justice, spiritual justice, and the sword of mercy, or the amethyst that's embedded inside the orb, which is apparently older than the United States of America, and there's even a cloak of righteousness, believe it or not, and the chrism oil consecrated in Jerusalem is now going to be animal free. This new version of the oil isn't going to have ambergris, which is sperm whale intestines, or civet glands. Do you think this shows that we've got a modern monarchy?
Britannia gets modern, eh? That's cracking. To me, it sounds like some sort of sword and sorcery epic, possibly with Doctor Strange in the middle of it. It's just manifest absurdities. If you look at the way any other royal family anywhere else in Europe, where there is one, conducts itself, they don't do this level of coronation. It's almost, it feels like satire. So I'll be quite happy walking through Glasgow. I might pick up on it later, just to have a good laugh, but that's about it.
So you don't think that when you're on the march tomorrow, you're not going to give out that cheer that they want the entire nation to give out all at the same time? I can't remember.
Oh, we've been invited to swear allegiance to the king, or is it an actual cheer that we have? Will they all under that?
So you don't think the All Under One banner is going to raise its voices in one?
I think yes. I'm rather hoping, just for decorum, that they maybe don't sort of break out like the Celtic fans did at a recent football match and in a much broadcast Twitter video, because that might be a wee bit naughty. But I think it's going to the sentiment. Oh, I mean, not all independent supporters are Republicans by any means, but I think the general sentiment in Scotland is fairly strong that they're not going to be doing much cheering, and maybe a bit more swearing. If it's not swearing allegiance, it might be another sort of swearing.
Okay, well, I'm just going to quickly, before we move on, make one last attempt to try and get you to admit that we do actually have a modern monarchy about to. Well, he already is king, but this is just the anointment, isn't it? So they've got the Stone of Destiny, they've got golden carriages, jewel encrusted crowns, which apparently weigh about the same as 2 bags of sugar, but It's no longer just the Church of England, it's now all religions: Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. So maybe that proves that we're now a modern monarchic state. No?
It doesn't in itself mean it's modern, but it means it's a wee bit more diverse if they deliver on it. I think most likely it's going to be a predominantly Church of England service because the King is the head of the Church of England. It's different in Scotland. And I think the other denominations, much as Charles might wish them not to be, I think they will ultimately be on the sidelines.
Yeah, I think some religions are more likely to tune in than others, aren't they? I'll move on to the next item. A suspect has been arrested after at least 8 people were killed and 13 injured in a second mass shooting in Serbia in as many days. The man, who has been identified only by his initials, UB, was detained near the city of Kragujevac, Kragujevac, the Interior Ministry. Kragujevac, the voice in my ear tells me, and I'm still getting it wrong. Forgive me for my mispronunciation. The arrest followed a search by 600 police officers for a man who fled from near the town of Mladenovac late on Thursday after opening fire in different locations with an automatic weapon from a moving vehicle. All those admitted to hospital were born after 2000, the Serbian broadcaster RTS reported. 2 people aged 21 and 23 have had surgery and remain in a critical condition. Special forces were reported on Friday morning to have swept into the area 37 miles south of the capital, Belgrade, in search of the suspect, believed to be a 21-year-old man. The heavy police presence included the deployment of helicopters and drones as officers searched the difficult terrain. Bratislav Gašić, the Minister of Internal Affairs, called the attack an act of terrorism. The Director of Intelligence Agency, the BIA, Alexander Vulin, and the Health Minister, Danica Grujic, are reported to have visited the injured in hospital. The gunman had opened fire in a number of villages around Mladenovac. RTS reported firstly in the village of Dubona and then Malo Orazie and Sepsin. Again, forgive me for any pronunciations there. A police officer and his sister were said to be among the dead in Malo Orazie. It was reported that the shooting started after an argument with a police officer in a park in Dubona on Thursday evening. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has announced a moratorium on all gun permits, a practical disarmament of Serbia, and more frequent medical and psychological checks of gun owners. In a televised address today, he announced plans to expand the police force and send armed forces to protect every school. William, this is desperately sad, and it comes just a couple of days after a previous shooting in Serbia where a teenage boy opened fire in a school in Belgrade on Wednesday, killing several students. But do you think that, at least in Serbia, they are cracking down on gun ownership, unlike, for example, the United States of America?
I think that would be a good thing for them too. To be fair, this is a fairly rare event in Serbia. They do have a fairly high level of gun ownership. I think they're probably the third most in the world after the USA and Montenegro. And certainly they could do a wee bit more on that. There are also, I think, a fair number of illegal weapons following the civil wars and other wars of the last 20 years. However, despite all of that, it is a rare event. And I just think some measured responses to it. The two events are probably separate in themselves. I mean, the event in the school was a 13-year-old boy. How on earth that happened, I don't know. And it certainly wasn't any legally held weapon that did that. And the other thing to look at is maybe have a wee look at the underlying causes. I don't necessarily think it's even terrorism. There is something going on that's the level of dissatisfaction and, if you like, the sort of reaction to individual conversations that doesn't sit well and maybe hints at some sort of mental health issue or something like that. So it's not just the weapons, it's the people and it's the society. I think from their recent past, Serbia will do fine in clamping down on it happening again. But it is a very, very sad event.
Thank you. I mean, you say it's not just the weapons. I totally agree that it's the people in society. I wonder, is there another comparison to make to the way this has been handled in Serbia? I think I'm right in saying that the police they disabled the gunman, and so he's certainly it wasn't the previous shooting. It seems to me all too often that when I hear about similar events in Europe or in North America, it seems that the police just seem to go straight to kill, shoot the perpetrator. And when I wonder, can't they just disarm them, shoot them in the arm, and then find out what's going on and what the cause is? Is that right? Do you think?
Well, maybe, maybe not. It's the first thing they've got to make sure of is get rid of the danger as fast as you can. And if you can do that by simply disarming or disabling the shooter, that's fine. But all too often, I suspect you have to react immediately. And the only way to stop the situation is to shoot to kill, which is a sad thing to say, but nevertheless the case. So also, and I think in the US, frequently gunmen turn the guns on themselves at the end. So there is that too. But it is interesting to read that they were concentrating on disarming. So good for them if that was the achievement.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a policy or, but yeah, yeah, you're probably right. I probably am a wee bit too naive when it comes to things like that. So I'll move on to the next item. Two Nigerian women abducted as schoolgirls by a jihadi militant group 9 years ago have been rescued, the West African nation's military has said. One of the women had a 1-year-old baby, while the second gave birth to her second child days after being freed. Hawa Maltha and Esther Marcus, both 26, were among 276 schoolgirls abducted by Boko Haram militants in April 2014 from the government girls' secondary school in the village of Chibok. They were rescued in April by Nigerian soldiers and reunited with their families in the northeastern state of Borno, according to the Major General Ibrahim Ali, who leads the Nigerian military operation against the extremist violence in the northeast region that has been going on for more than a decade. Boko Haram fighters stormed the school in Borno 9 years ago as the girls were preparing for exams. More than 20 of the girls have regained their freedom in the past year, but nearly 100 are still missing. Malta and Marcus were forcibly married to extremists while in captivity. Ali told journalists in Madigurchi, the Borneo state capital, on Thursday. His comments echoed concerns of parents and activists about the maltreatment of the girls by Boko Haram, whose name in the local Hausa language means Western education is forbidden. Both girls were married 3 times, as one husband after another was killed during clashes with the military. Most of the girls who returned home in recent months had escaped from the Sambisa forest, a known hideout for the extremists. The girls and their parents have said most of them had babies after either being forced into marriage or losing hope of ever regaining freedom. So, William, I'm struck by a few things with this, again, another desperate situation. Just to let the viewers know, Boko Haram is an Islamist militant organisation which was considered the world's deadliest terrorist group in the 2010s, according to the Global Terrorism Index. But William, like me, you probably remember when they were abducted, when that school was attacked all those years ago, and it was major news. It was world headlines. And I'm just conscious just how little I've heard about it since. In fact, I mean, I don't even think I even realised that there were still some of those school children still in captivity. Does that mean that?
No, no,
On you go.
yeah, I mean, yes, it's a horrific story, and yes, it was news for quite a period, and there almost at that time seemed to be hope that maybe they would get the girls back. But here we are 9 years on, and nearly a third of them are still missing. And to be honest, those who are now being released, their lives are ruined. And the trauma they've gone through over those 9 years, uh, it's almost indescribable. And I just wish them well and hope for the best for them. But it's still a desperately sad situation. And Boko Haram and those like them are a problem, a big problem for Nigeria, and have been over the last few years. And if anything, reports suggest they're getting more brutal. So it's a troubled country with lots of troubling things going on.
Yeah, thank you, William. And apparently, it's that Boko Haram are not just restricted to Nigeria. Apparently, they've moved over the borders into neighbouring countries. But I'll move on to our last item. Glasgow has been chosen as the host city for the 2024 International Association of Science Parks and Areas of Innovation European Division event, which will be held at the University of Strathclyde. The winning bid, announced at the closing session of the 2023 IASP European Division event in Reykjavik today, was submitted by Glasgow City Innovation District, the GCID, and will see IASP members from across Europe gather to share knowledge on how to help science parks and innovative districts to thrive. GCID, Scotland's first innovation district, is a hub for entrepreneurship, innovation and collaboration, which is building on Scotland's rich tradition of scientific excellence and industrial ingenuity. Located in the heart of Glasgow city centre, the district, a partnership between Strathclyde, Glasgow City Council, Scottish Enterprise, Entrepreneurial Scotland and Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, is home to innovative companies and organisations. GCID joined IASP in 2022. Founded in 1984, IASP's mission is to drive growth, internationalisation and effectiveness for its members by coordinating an active network of managers of science, technology, research parks and innovation districts in 79 countries, and enhancing new business opportunities for members and their companies. The IASP is a worldwide membership-based association that is an independent, non-profit, non-governmental organisation in special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Alistair Gunn, director of GCID, said, "We are absolutely thrilled to have been chosen as a host city for next year's IASP European Division event." He went on to say, "As recently joined members of IASP, we are eager to fully maximise the benefits that membership brings, and we are excited to become delegates from across Europe to Glasgow City Innovation District to showcase what we are doing, but also to learn from our peers." So, William, we always like to end on a good news story, a good news Scottish story. So this seems to fit the bill there. We didn't mention it in the item, but I don't know if everybody knows, but I'm 99% sure that the building that is referenced as this place in Glasgow for this new innovation hub, it's what used to be Strathclyde University's old building, just behind George Square with the giant pink "People Make Glasgow" hoarding. And I've noticed it, yeah, and so it's already being what's the word, upgraded, and there's scaffolding going up and the like. So this is going to transform what at the moment I think is a bit of an eyesore, no?
Well, that would be good if it did. This is a good news story, and it's nice to see this rich tradition of scientific excellence and entrepreneurship and industrial ingenuity continuing. And it needs to be a good news story that goes well beyond Broadcasting Scotland. Dare I say it, even into the mainstream media. I'm very pleased to hear it.
Yes, and it I suppose it kind of nicely chimes with Glasgow being the host for COP26, and so we've got climate control and now science and technology.
All we need now is the Eurovision Song Contest. Oh.
Yes, that was a sore one, wasn't it? Well, Thank you for your patience with us, William, and for your insight. Yes, and for spending time on a Friday night. So,
Thank you for having me.
always a pleasure. Well, that's it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So, but just before we go, William, I should have said before I did our usual sign off that tomorrow, Broadcasting Scotland, we're hoping to cover the events in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. So we'll be out on the streets, and so maybe we'll bump into you there and get to chat, see how it's going tomorrow on the streets of Glasgow.
Well, look for the Yes Perth City flag, and I won't be too far from it.
Okay, we'll do that, and also just to let you know that then on Sunday we're going to have our usual Full Scottish, which is going to be hosted by Andrew Wilson. So make sure to tune in to that. So good night and thank you for watching.